Hello my internet family and welcome back to my channel. In this video we are going to be making a pair of transitional Regency stays. The Regency period in fashion, which lasted from 1811 to 1820, was a time of change and innovation. The French Revolution led to a rejection of the elaborate styles of the earlier 18th century, with simpler, more natural styles inspired by classical antiquity rising in popularity. And with this rise in popularity also came a rise in waistlines. This empire silhouette featured a high waistline that emphasized the natural curves of the body. And it was a departure from the low-waisted styles that had been popular in previous decades. This new silhouette placed an emphasis on the breasts as two separate focuses, meaning they should be lifted and separated. This required a re-engineering of the supportive undergarments known as stays to focus on space for the individual breast, with a high, rounded, pillowy shape being ideal. And no longer was compression of the waistline required. Now, once we're properly in the Regency period, there are two styles of stays which become prevalent. The first being the short stay, which is kind of similar to a modern long line bra, with the end of the stay ending above the waist. And the second being the long stay, which ended below the waist, but didn't try to compress the body at all. It was more focused on smoothing out and rounding the curves of the body. But there was this time in between when we saw some really interesting designs. We could really see the experimentation, incorporating new ideas like bust cups, while retaining old features like waist tabs, which no longer really served any purpose. And it's these transitional stays that I will be making today. I'll be using a pattern from Corsets by Caroline on Etsy that was, I think, obviously inspired by this extant pair of original stays at the V&A. I'll put a description to the pattern in the description below in case you want to try making it yourself. I'm making mine out of cotton, which was a popular material at the time. And I'm also using plastic boning, which mimics the behavior of whalebone. I'll show you how to sew the stays together, how to add the boning, and how to lace them up and wear them. So if you're interested in learning how to make a pair of transitional Regency stays, then keep watching. So here's what we have to work with once all of our pattern pieces have been cut out. And is it just me, or does this kind of look like a sewing bat symbol? The first thing I'm doing here is taking my pattern pieces and using a washable fabric pen to mark out all of my boning channels. So I am marking along the edge where the pattern piece ends, and then for all the boning channels that kind of curve and go in the middle, I just am using my best judgment to estimate where that line should go. And then I'm just repeating that same process for all the pattern pieces. With the boning channels marked, the next step is to sew them. So I have both the outer and the lining layer of my fabric here, and I'm sewing the boning channels through both of those layers. The cups of this pattern look like huge. They look like they don't even fit the pattern, but that's because they have 3 rows where they get gathered up with cording, and it's this really kind of like neat thing that I've never seen on any other stays or corset pattern. But you know, these were sort of these transitional stays where they were experimenting with how to get the shape that they wanted for that Regency silhouette. So kind of cool to see this style of cup. So all I'm doing here is sewing in the channel where that cord will get threaded through. With the boning channels in and the cups prepared, next step is to sew all the pieces of the pattern together, leaving the cups out for now. Now it's really starting to look like a pair of stays. So this is the back of the stays here, and we just need to add in our eyelets. So I've gone through and marked the placement of the eyelets, and then now I'm just using my awl to poke a hole through all those layers of fabric. Then using some white embroidery thread, I'm just whip stitching around all sides of that opening. It was at about this point that I realized I had made a huge mistake. So let me just show you what I have done here. This is the stays or the corset in progress, and here's the inside. Now, I just went about constructing this the way that I would have with like my other 18th century stays, where I did each of the individual pieces, sewed the boning channels in, and then did the seams to attach the pattern pieces together. And then when I did that, I realized, I still have all of these loose seams, and normally like I would then take like one lining fabric and cover all of this, but this pattern doesn't call for any additional lining. So I think I messed this up, but I am just going to proceed because I don't want to redo anything, and I'm just going to add my normal 18th century lining to the inside of this, and hopefully that turns out okay. But before doing that, I needed to add in the cups, and it was here that I realized that I made yet another mistake. I must have just like not been reading the instructions at all. So I had to unpick all of those gathering rows that I had stitched into the cups before, and then basically sew the cups right sides to right sides and flip them over so that top edge was nice and finished, before then redoing all of the channels to put the cording through. And to make it easy on myself, I actually cut the cording out and then placed it in each channel before sewing it with my zipper foot, so that way I didn't actually have to thread the cording through after the fact. The cups get gathered not only horizontally along those cording channels, but also the entire edge, which gets attached to the main body of the stays, needs to be gathered as well. So I just sewed a row of gathering stitches, making sure that I skipped over the cords all the way along the edge there before gathering that up. So here's another area where I deviated from the pattern instructions. In the instructions, it tells you for each of those cording channels through the cups to, in the sort of very center of the cup, make 2 eyelet holes so that you can adjust the gathering of the cord from the interior center of the cup. But one, I really didn't want to have to make more eyelet holes if I didn't need to. And 2, I really didn't want to have all of the like extra cord sitting on the inside of the bust cup. So what I did instead is, after gathering the cups, I pinned them into place, and I just left, like I only stitched it down on the inside across the cording, stitched it all the way around under the bust, and then when I got to the outside part where all of those cords are exiting, I didn't sew across them. So my plan is that once the cups are in place and once the rest of the stays are finished, I'll be able to try it on and adjust the cups from the side before then fastening the cording down. Now that those bust cups are in place, it is time to insert the boning. And I used 2 different sizes of boning for this just because that's what I had on hand left over from other projects. I would say the larger size definitely fit the boning channels better. The smaller bones kind of like wiggle about and shift in the channels a lot, which may become problematic later, but I really didn't want to buy any new supplies for this project, so I used what I had. Following that theme of being frugal and using supplies that I already have, to bind the edges of these stays, I used some twill tape. And this was probably not the best idea because it very much does not stretch on the bias. So I ended up having to kind of fold it around a lot of those tight corners instead of being able to like smoosh it and make it curve nicely. It doesn't look the greatest, but I'm always of the opinion that for garments like these that don't show, I don't care as much what they look like as long as they are functional. So I'm okay with that. After the binding is attached to the bottom, the next step is actually to attach these straps. And this is the first pair of stays that I have made that actually has straps because my 18th century ones I made without. So these just get attached really easily up at the top by stitching straight across and making sure that we're doing this step after we already have the boning inserted there, because once these straps are sewn on, there will be no space for those bones to slip in. So remember how I messed up and I didn't properly finish the inside of these stays? And I was going to try to add a lining to it the same way that I did with my earlier 18th century stays. So I basically just measured roughly how much I thought I was going to need to cover the inside of these stays, then got my extra fabric out and cut out a rectangle about that same size. Then I laid the fabric down on the inside of my stays and tried to sort of cut away the excess for the cups and fold the edges under and pin it all into place. And this is where I very quickly gave up on this idea of trying to line the inside because I could not for the life of me get that piece of fabric to lay nicely, lining up all the edges and staying flush with the rest of the fabric. Maybe I could have gotten it if I had been willing to spend several more hours fine-tuning it, but I just decided it wasn't worth it. So instead what I ended up doing is I took some of that twill tape that I had used to bind the bottom edge and just laid it flat over each of the exposed seams and did some hand sewing to tack it down in place. Then I used that same twill tape to bind the top edge all the way up around the straps, meeting at the sort of like side of the bust cups. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, please do leave them in the comments below. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel to see more historical costuming videos. See you next time.